I combined a few icebergs and asked online to make one giant iceberg about, well, these giants of light that has been one of the best-selling franchises in Japan. Thank you to my team for helping with the final version and for writing. So with that said, let's start with Level 1. Marcosatsu doesn't make Ultraman videos. I don't. Tsuburaya Productions. The company that produces Ultraman content, founded by Toho special effects director Eiji Tsuburaya, who is often called the father of tokusatsu. They have produced many tokusatsu and drama series over the years, but none more famous than their flagship Ultra series. If they're brought up again, then they will be referred to as Supro. Man Nissan. There have been a lot of Ultraman and Ultrawoman after the original aired in 1966, but this Ultra is just called Ultraman. So to differentiate his name, Japanese viewers called him Man-Nissan or Man-san. It's also what we'll be going with when referring to this specific Ultraman, unless the context is pertaining to what happened to the original show. We'll be calling the show either the original Ultraman or Ultraman 1966, or even just Ultra 66. Shuach! Ultramen are pretty vocal when they fight, and Man-san is known for going with Shuach whenever he flies off. These grunt sound effects are iconic in their own right. Ultra Q, the first entry in the Ultraman franchise. Often called the Japanese Twilight Zone, this entry did not have an actual Ultra being as a hero. Instead, it showed mysteries and paranormal occurrences, mostly from monsters and aliens, that humanity had to face alone. There's a video on this channel that goes deep into the series. Check it out if you'd like. Remakes and reboots. Since 2011, there have been many releases of reboots of the original Ultraman. The main series is still going, with its own entries mostly taking the lineage of the shows that came before it, but most of these take a different turn. You might already know a 2022 movie reimagining of the original 1966 series from the same creative team as 2016's Shin Godzilla, being of writer Hideaki Anno and director Shinji Higuchi being Shin Ultraman. Another extremely popular reboot happens to be a sequel manga series to the original Ultraman 1966, simply titled, in all caps, Ultraman, which has been ongoing since 2011. In 2019, the manga was adapted into a 3D anime released worldwide on Netflix, with its second season released in 2022 and a third and final season in 2023. Unrelated to the anime series, a CGI animated Ultraman feature film is coming to Netflix in the future. Unless you're watching this in the future, then it already came out. It's being pitched as a standalone film that can act as a jumping-on point to the franchise, reuse Godzilla suits. Eiji Tsuburaya had a big part in directing the special effects in the Godzilla series, so Toho allowed his company to use their Godzilla suits. The most obvious ones are Gomez and Jiras, who used a couple of different Godzilla suits, and Rodan and Manda showed up a few times in Ultra Q. The most notable suit in the early Ultra series was Baragon's, who was used for all of these guys. Spoon Gag. In episode 34 of Ultraman, Hayata is called upon to transform into Ultraman, but because he was in the middle of eating, he pulls out a spoon instead of his beta capsule. This idea led to a lot of arguing behind the scenes on it if it should even be used at all, with the idea being chiefed by director Akioji Soji. But knowing the legacy of this joke, it's a good thing it wasn't cut. Ultraman Day. July 10th is officially recognized as Ultraman Day, being the date in which the Birth of Ultraman stage show, the first time Ultraman was ever seen by the public, was broadcast. In the West, this event has been celebrated in the past few years through livestream events on Tokusatsu and UltramanConnection.com. A recurring feature of the Tokusatsu streams have been English Spark Doll Theater segments from YouTuber Monster Island Buddies. Ultraman Eras. Like with any long-running Tokusatsu, Ultraman is divided up into distinct eras, though it's not as obvious as it seems. Of course, you have the Showa era, starting from 1966 Ultra Q to Ultraman USA in 1987. The Heisei era started with 1990's Ultraman Towards the Future, but Supro tends to group it and Ultraman the Ultimate Hero with the Showa era's Ultras by association. Instead, they opt to present Ultraman Tiga, the first traditional Japanese-produced Ultra series in the Heisei era. It's the starting point for a new period of Ultraman. The Heisei period continued up to Ultraman Rube in 2018, and the first Reiwa broadcasted season was Taiga. Every Ultra between that and Ginga are known as the New Generation Ultramen. Marvel Comics. You all probably know who Marvel is, but recently they have partnered with Tsuburaya, leading to 3 comic miniseries up to this point: The Rise of Ultraman, The Trials of Ultraman, and The Mystery of Ultraseven. These comics act as a brand new continuity separate from the main universe. A new project has been announced for some point in the future showcasing the Ultras teaming up with the actual Avengers. Official releases. While Chayo, who we'll definitely bring up later, was still shopping around their Ultraman distribution rights overseas, DVD sets for Ultra Q, Ultraman, and Ultraseven were released in the US, featuring very poor quality rips of episodes, consistent spelling errors and mistranslations, a weird reworked soundtrack to replace the old sound effects, and mistimed subtitles, especially in the 7 set. Once Supro won their case against Chayo, more avenues opened up for official releases, including releasing shows and movies in America. You can buy them physically from Mill Creek or watch digitally through Toku HD, Tokusatsu, and much more. Not to mention the current series being simulcast with English subs on YouTube right after it airs in Japan. Level 2. Ultraseven and Pokemon. Ultraseven introduced capsule monsters, which were kaiju housed in small capsules that Dan would summon a few times. His main trio are Wyndham, Miklas, and Agita. In Ultraman Leo, Kid wrote into Tsuburaya saying that if Dan was incapable of becoming 7, why doesn't he use the capsule monsters? This led to the introduction of Sevenger, who was delivered to Dan by Ultraman Jack. But then he wasn't used again in Leo, though it's nice since he got a second chance in Ultraman Z. Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon, has gone on record saying that the Ultra series capsule monsters were what inspired Pokeballs. Mansan's 3 suits. Throughout the original Ultraman series, Ultraman's suit and mask designs change between periods of episodes. The Type A suit is shown from the first episode to the 13th. Type B is through episode 14 to 29, and Type C is episode 30 through 39. Type C is the most commonly used suit to this day, with it essentially being a streamlined version of the concepts made before it. Type B is known for having a calmer and sharper looking mask, as well as some pointy shoes. And Type A is known for its visibly stretched and morphed mask, a carryover for a scrap concept involving the mask moving with the actor's mouth. The Ultra Brothers. An elite group of Ultras who have served on Earth for a time and are well respected amongst the Land of Light. Every main and secondary Ultra introduced in the Showa continuity universe, up to Mabius and Hikari, is a member of this group. It should be noted that the term brothers is used to refer to the group as a brotherhood, not as biological siblings. Ultra Fight. Following Ultraseven, Tsuburaya was hard at work on other projects, leaving the Ultra series dormant. After Eiji Tsuburaya passed, however, the company had no direction in where to go. Hajime Tsuburaya, the new patriarch of the company, figured to make a no-budget show to get back to normal, and thus Ultra Fight was commissioned. Initially, it cut up previous monster fights from Ultraman and Ultraseven, with NHK sports announcer Jiro Yamada narrating. Original fights were filmed later too, but they were extremely low budget, and with no special effects. Despite this, the series was very successful and revitalized interest in the franchise, allowing Tsuburaya to pursue a proper re-entrance for the Ultra series, The Return of Ultraman. There are also plenty of tributes made for Ultra Fight, mostly in name only to tell stories, but some have gone back to the low-budget suit-on-suit action. The most recent of these tributes, Shin Ultra Fight, is unique in that it not only does reuse footage of Shin Ultraman, but it also features reenactments of original Ultraman fights through the use of the film's CG models. Recaps. In the early 2010s, Ultraman's budget was at an all-time low. As such, a new series was made, Ultraman Retsuden, which rebroadcasts episodes from the past with little to no alteration and linking narration on occasion at the beginning and end. The strategy proved successful, and to this day, during the periods in which a brand new Ultraman series is not airing, low-budget seasons made this way have been made to fill the airtime and make sure Tsuburaya keeps Ultraman's time slot. The main entries also fill a single week's time slot with a low-budget episode that's primary purpose is to remind the audience on what has happened in the series up to that point. Ever since Ultraman Orb, this episode type has been mainly used as the 13th episode, the halfway point of every season since 2016. A lot of people see the recap shows that air in the first half of the year as inconsequential filler that you don't need to watch. While not necessarily wrong, there are cool moments within them, as well as a hint or two of them actually being canon events that happen in the franchise timeline. In the Zero and Z voice dramas, an episode is set within the Spark Dolls Theater segments at the end of Ultraman Ginga episodes. While there, Zero reveals that he often travels to an alternate universe in the multiverse to talk to people and show them the past adventures of various Ultras. Unfortunately, this all turned out to be a dream Zet was having, but you never know. One day they may indeed be confirmed canon. Reuse of past kaiju. As Tsuburaya wanted to honor their older seasons after the High Concept series, Ultraman Max utilized old kaijus, making brand new suits for them. Mebius continued this trend, and it made more sense as this was the 40th anniversary. After Mebius concluded, however, Tsuburaya did not have the budget to create many new suits at the time, focusing what money they did have into other aspects of production. As such, a vast majority of monsters that have appeared since the Ultra Galaxy series began to reuse kaiju from previous seasons, mostly with the suits from Max and Mebius. Some people enjoy seeing this familiar kaiju and aliens reappear, interested to see how they'll be recontextualized for a given episode. There are those, however, who disagree and want to see seasons have a brand new cast of kaijus. Tiga dub. Ultraman Tiga's 4Kids dub did not catch on, ending around the halfway mark. Cast members working on the show cited the lack of clear direction for the dub as a key reason as to why it failed, alternating between being treated as a serious story and other times being portrayed as a comedic parody.
Commander, look! Even worse than your mother-in-law.
It also doesn't have an official release, with only some episodes being preserved online. Funimation took care of the video release of Tiga, and with possible very specific intentions, it was with subs instead of 4Kids' dub. Still, the dub lives on in infamy, and there were plenty of people whose first exposure to the Ultra franchise was the Tiga dub. Plus, the opening is so cheesily fun, I love it to death. Maybe even more than Take Me Higher. 1 million subscriber video. A special video was released on the Ultraman YouTube channel, thanking the worldwide audience in various languages for helping them achieve the milestone. Some are obvious inclusions, such as Reboot speaking Malay, and some aren't matched too well, such as Ace speaking Arabic. But the most interesting choices happen to be from Seven and Taro, each speaking Spanish and Korean respectively, and each happen to have cult followings in Mexico and South Korea due to being the first Ultras to air there. It's also just a very cute video. Aim for its butthole. A very memeable line from the same episode as the spoon gag we mentioned earlier. Given the sentence, I'm sure you can imagine that some people prefer to translate this line in a slightly cruder way. Ultraman Connection. UltramanConnection.com is the official international website for Ultraman as a part of Tsuburaya's recent worldwide outreach. It's got it all. News, exclusive merchandise, movie rentals, live stream hosted by Shawn Nichols of Ultraman Max, with guest appearances from cast and crew, and even a pretty impressive Discord server. Man-san, Jack, and Zoffy. Many might say a lot of Ultras look the same, but Man-ni-san, Jack, and Zoffy are the ones that people point towards that look the most similar. I think it's easier when you see their full bodies since Jack looks like he has boxers on, Zoffy has bumps along his chest, called star marks, and Man-san has no additional red lines like the other two. Now if it's just their faces, then good luck on that one. Ultraman Lingo. Some important names and nouns to know in the Ultraman franchise include hosts, who are people that, host. While some Ultras can have human forms, other hosts can control an Ultra entirely. There are also defense teams, usually human organizations that defend the Earth from alien threats. An important place is the Land of Light, the Ultra homeworld located in Nebula M78, which is 3 million light-years away from Earth. The color timer is a circle or dot on the center of an Ultraman's chest, used to indicate their energy level. These timers weren't part of the original Ultraman's design at first, but Supro wanted to give Ultraman a weakness. Timers were later explained to be surgically implanted to Ultra Warriors. And for now, spacium is an element or substance in the Ultra universe. It's often given a vague explanation, but ultimately, it's the super cool sci-fi element that can do whatever the writer wants. Ultraman Belial. A traitor to the Land of Light. Belial was once a member of the Intergalactic Defense Force who fought in the war against Alien Emperor and was friends with Father of Ultra, before succumbing to his own desire for power. He attempted to steal the plasma spark, but was exiled, where he fused with alien ray blood and set his sights on his homeworld. Following his imprisonment and eventual breakout, Belial has gone to be one of the most frequently recurring villains in the Ultra series, meeting the final end at the hands of his son, Ultraman Geed. Clip show movies. During the late 70s and into the 80s, the Ultra series was on hiatus from mainline TV series. To compensate, Tsuburaya produced several movies consisting mostly of stock footage from previous seasons and released them in theaters, with maybe 1 or 2 newly shot scenes, if you were lucky. The first example of this was 1967's Ultraman movie monster feature, with the last being 1996's Revive Ultraman, which uniquely featured all of the still-alive Ultraman 1966 cast members returning and dubbing over the past footage with new dialogue. Ultraman video games. It's a Bandai-sponsored tokusatsu. There's bound to be plenty of video games, starting with Ultraman on the MSX all the way to Ultra Kaiju Monster Rancher for the Switch. There are a lot of variations when it comes to games featuring Ultraman, even if there's less of them compared to Kamen Rider. Some of the most popular are the Fighting Evolution series, but one of my writers, Liz, highly recommends the 2004 PS2 game simply titled Ultraman. A major Ultraman subseries was Ultraman Club, a series of RPGs, and there's also the SD Great Battle games, which change up the gameplay of every title. The most unique premise is from City Shrouded in Shadow, which features various Ultras and their monsters, and you're supposed to avoid the disasters that they cause. That's the one I personally recommend. It is just a really interesting game. Probably not for everybody since it mostly is a walking simulator, but still it is a very neat experience. Probably the most well-known Ultraman game, or really the most infamous one, is the Super Nintendo game based on Towards the Future, not only because it received a full worldwide release, but mainly because it's known as a pretty bad game. There's also an Ultraman pinball machine. It's pinball, but Ultraman themed, and released in North America. Neat. And Ultraman is in Fall Guys. No comment. Stage shows. If you think that Kamen Rider stage shows were great, Ultraman basically blows them out of the water. Ultraman festivals every year, most of which are canon, have insane stage effects, original monsters, returning actors, and even different actors across Japan's 3 regions to portray Ultraman Zero's human host. Ultraman vs. Godzilla. A seemingly never-ending debate that has gone on strong since the character was introduced. Even Tsuburaya themselves were aware of it, overtly taking advantage of the fact they had a Godzilla suit to make Jiras as Godzilla-like as possible in order to give a slight answer to the question. Until the day comes when an official crossover project occurs, if ever, we will never truly know. Though my money's on Ultraman. Level 3. English and Spanish dubs. Ultraman is actually one of the earliest examples of tokusatsu coming to the United States, with the same group behind Speed Racer dubbing the original show for syndication. Ultraseven had 2 separate English dubs, one shown in Hawaii in the late 70s, and the other on Turner-owned stations, known as the Sinar dub. Unfortunately, a majority of the Hawaiian dub and some of the Sinar dub are lost. An infamous English dub is the 2002 Ultraman Tiga's dub for 4Kids. Recently, Supra has been dubbing other projects such as the Ultra Galaxy Fight series, mostly from foreign talent who live in Japan. And Ultraman Z has its own official English dub, which is really, really good.
Will you join me? I require your aid. Dude.
You do talk just a little funny.
You serious? How very troubling.
The US and Hawaii are not the only English-speaking territories to get dubs as well. Most of the Showa seasons were shown across Malaysia in English. Mexico too has some of the same Showa seasons dubbed in Spanish. We could be here all day with the many languages and countries Ultraman released in. It's a blessing that the outreach for the Ultra series is that big at all, especially when the international rights to the first era of the franchise were held back by Chayo Productions. And we'll get to that. Again, lost dubs. Ultra Q had been picked up for syndication in the US, with the full English dub and translated title cards being ready for use. But with the series being black and white at the time, when color was the next big thing, the ready-to-go audio was shelved, never to be seen again. Years later, the audio for Episode 3's English dub was posted online from a private collector who happened to have it. You can find the audio synced up with the colorized version of the episode easily on YouTube. Plans to localize the Ultraman as a full series, separate from the Adventures of Ultraman movies, did not get past the pitch pilot. The original director has confirmed he has a copy of the dub pilot, but is skeptical to upload it online due to copyright concerns. Anime Expo 2022. The Ultraman series was one of the flagship franchises represented at Anime Expo 2022, with live panels, meet and greets, live events, and new exclusive news. New exclusive news? Isn't that just news? Shawn Nichols called Alien Metron sus live on stage in front of a large audience at one point. Just thought I'd mention that.
What are you doing here? You are so sus!
Guillermo del Toro. One of the most famous fans of Ultraman is Guillermo del Toro. I mean, he's not famous for liking Ultraman, but he is famous for making a lot of movies. His love for Ultraman stretches out to his movies. One of the most apparent is Pacific Rim. During a press release for the film in Japan, there is quite a bit of attention for Del Toro speaking out for his appreciation for the Ultra franchise. And during a morning talk show appearance, the program organized him visiting a classic kaiju merchandise shop, and being visited by Alien Baltan. Tsuburaya themselves gave a tribute to him by having a planet featured in Ultraman X being named Planet Guillermo. Kane Koski. a Japanese-American actor and the only person to have starred as a main character in an Ultraman, Rider, Sentai, and Godzilla production. For Ultraman, he played the role of Kenichi Kai, the human host of Ultraman Powered in Ultraman The Ultimate Hero. He also came back to voice Powered himself in the English dub of The Absolute Conspiracy. CGI Groob. In the Ultraman Rube movie, the Fusion Ultra, Ultraman Groob, is portrayed entirely with CGI throughout its time in the film. This took pretty much everyone by surprise, as magazine scans and on-set photographs show that they had, at least for a good chunk of the movie's production, been using a suit to portray the characters before switching to full CG later. The reason why this change was made is unclear. Every subsequent reappearance of the character has been portrayed with a costume. Ultraman is not the character's actual names. The term Ultraman was not a name created by the Ultras themselves. In the first episode of the original show, Ultraman only ever refers to himself as an alien from Nebula M78. The term Ultraman was instead created by Hayata when asked to make a name for the being at the end of the episode. Zolfi, the second Ultra being shown in the franchise, is actually given his name. The Land of Light later adopted the Ultraman title as an honor given to those worthy of it, and as a way to be known across the galaxy as its defenders. Ultraman Tribes. Ultramen have their individual strengths and weaknesses determined by, well, their colors. Ultras with red and silver based body colors are generally more physically capable and are more likely to be active in the Intergalactic Defense Force, whilst blue Ultras tend to have superior intellect and technological skills, such as Cosmos or Hikari. Of course, there are exceptions to these rules. Ultraman The Rocks. It's an album I never stop bringing up whenever I talk about Ultraman, and you should go listen to it if you haven't. The band Kaguhu Tokusotai covered pretty much every Showa-era Ultraman song, along with a few other surprises, and it's just a really good listen. I highly recommend it. Ultra World Record. The Ultraman franchise holds the Guinness World Record for most TV spin-off series. The record only applies to mainline Ultraman series and not to Ultra Q, movies, and side content like the Heisei 7 specials, but it's still a very impressive feat. Prequel novels. Nearly every Ultraman series since Orb has had a prequel novel released after the show, each focusing on the past of one or some of the characters that may not have been fleshed out in the actual series. These are namely the aforementioned Orb Chronicle, the Rube novel focusing on the past of the original Rosso and Blue told from the perspective of Grigio, the Taiga novel focusing on Taro and Tregier's past and the latter's fall to darkness, and the Zet novel about how Jugless Juggler ends up in Zet's universe, Thunderbirds, a British marionation series produced in 1966. This series was cited as inspiration for the futuristic vehicles and miniature work seen in Ultraseven. This was later given an homage in Shin Ultraman, with models of the various Thunderbird vehicles being seen on the shelves. Bin Furuya, Ultraman's original suit actor, and Amagi from Ultraseven. He's still very active in the franchise, and especially with the fanbase, to this day appearing regularly at conventions and interviews, where he is reportedly very critical of your Spacium Ray pose, and even returning to perform motion capture for Shin Ultraman. He is also one of the few people in this entire world that can pull off wearing a white suit so effortlessly. Ultraman and other Suit Pro shows. Ultraman has made some degree of impact on the other works Tsuburaya has made, but there are a handful of overt cases. Most apparent is the use of decrepit kaiju suits in Redman, but outside of that, the return of Ultraman monsters Gudan and Twintail both made appearances in the series Fireman, oh hey Aka Ranger, and in the series Dinosaur War Isenborg. A character turns on the TV to see a newly filmed clip of Mansan and Ultraman Taro posing on the camera before, shaking hands to a job well done. Or maybe that's Jack and Zoffi. Again, the suits suck. And is set to cover the Return of Ultraman theme for some reason. Eiji Tsuburaya Google Doodle. On July 7th, 2015, the date of what would have been Eiji Tsuburaya's 111th birthday was when a Google Doodle was released on the site's homepage. In it, you would help Tsuburaya set up a Kyodai hero and kaiju battle scene. The game can still be played upon searching for it in Google Doodle's archival site. Showa-era brutality. Showa Ultra series have garnered a bit of reputation for the Ultra's sometimes gory and excessive ways of killing off their enemies, as well as other instances of excessive violence. This element is still somewhat retained to this day, as dismemberments and alike do occasionally still occur, but the explicitness is greatly toned down from what it used to be. Zolfi's features. Zolfi was the second inhabitant of the Land of Light to ever be shown in the Ultra series. It was decided that this other member of Ultraman's race looked exactly like him, with key distinctions. For one, his face is longer, and he has additional stripes. One of the most defining aspects of him is his star marks, badges to indicate his experience as a superior. In his first appearance, his dorsal fin was black as opposed to Mansan's silver fin. Future appearances of Zolfi don't have this, as designers for later shows misinterpreted the fin to be silver. Maybe if that was kept on Zolfi, we would have a better time telling the Ultras apart. LOL. Eleking's gun. In an episode of the original Ultra fight, the kaiju Eleking is shown wielding a gun, where he proceeds to mow down his opponents before shooting himself dead. As you may expect from that description, this has gone on to be pretty infamous and a memed moment in the franchise. Decades later, in the Sevenger Fight web series, the moment was overtly called back to. Eleking ends up getting a hold of Sevenger's similar gun weapon where he chases a robot around in a circle before the weapon goes off as he is looking down the barrel. Dinosaur tank. I mean, well, what can I say? You look at this guy and you can immediately tell he means business. A legendary kaiju that has only ever appeared in a single episode of Ultraseven, but has left a lasting impact for just how strangely awesome it is, despite how serious designer Toru Narita absolutely hated it. How Ultraman Jack got his name. The main Ultra in Return of Ultraman was meant to be Mansan, with Shin Hayata returning to pass the beta capsule on to a new user. In respect for Eiji Tsuburaya, these plans were changed to make the character a brand new Ultraman, with Man's appearance in episode 38 confirming this. He was previously known as Shinman, the Ultraman who returned, or Ultraman 2. In the 1984 film Ultraman Zoffi, Shinman was named Ultraman Jack, based on magazine pulls. Coincidentally, Jack was previously a name planned for Ultraman Taro that went unused. Ultraseven was not an Ultraman. Tsuburaya originally intended for Ultraseven to be in its own continuity. This is rectified by the fact that there are no actual monsters from the previous seasons that reappear, and Seven's own name comes from him being the unofficial 7th member of the Ultra Guard. The idea of the capsule monsters being previous monsters was pitched, but ultimately dropped to further separate it from what had come before. As stated earlier, Return of Ultraman combined the continuities together, but the Heisei Ultra 7 series and Ultra 7X continued from that separate canon. Level 4. Ultra Signs. Ultras can produce giant messages to communicate with each other across space by using their own language, which happens to be Japanese in a cipher. Redman. Redman was often used as a placeholder name for early Ultraman projects, as to protect the title's copyright. It later became its own low-budget short series where the titular Redman fought previously used kaiju suits, much like Ultra Fight. It's pretty notorious nowadays for the way that Redman would purposely track down and kill many of these monsters, a narrative that a US-produced comic follows. He's watching you. Tsuburaya Imagination. Tsuburaya Productions' very own subscription-based streaming platform. It features a wide array of content, a majority of the many Ultraman shows and movies, as well as Tsuburaya's other tokusatsu series. It boasts a selection of exclusive comics and articles, along with some original shows, like Sevenger Fight. I wish Sevenger fought me. Kaiju Funerals. During the production of Ultraman Taro, Tsuburaya honored their kaiju suits by arranging a funeral for them after they couldn't be used any further. Like the Monster Graveyard episode, the funeral was Buddhist in nature. The suits were laid down in a pile and lit up in a fire, with their show's actors, directors, and in-character Ultraman in attendance. Kaiju Girls. Another animated sub-series in which high school girls take on forms reminiscent of Ultraman Kaiju and train at monster school. Loosely based on, and being a continuation of, a manga series entitled The Ultra Monsters Anthropomorphic Project. The series is vast and wide-reaching, but output of the series has slowed recently. Its popularity was even said to have funded the Ultra series at one point, though it doesn't seem like the case anymore. Ultra N Project. A planned-out reinvention of the Ultraman brand, shifting its demographic more towards teens and young adults, beginning with the 2004 movie Ultraman/Ultraman the Next, which led directly into Ultraman Nexus, the main Ultras of which are merely weaker versions of the godly Ultraman Noah. Unfortunately, due to the movie failing financially and network interference hampering the success of Nexus, the project ended just as soon as it began, causing Nexus to end earlier than anticipated, and a sequel film, Ultraman 2 Requiem, being abandoned. A short novella was released later to tie up a few of the loose ends, but Tsuburaya decided to go more traditional with the next season, Ultraman Max. 7 Superior. A mysterious figure that appears in the final 2 episodes of Ultra 7, warning Dawn to not transform. His motivations seem to be much more against the benefit of humanity than Zolfi in the original Ultraman. There have been many theories as to who this character is. Is it really 7 Senior? What's the significance of him looking just like Seven? Was it just a figment of Dan's imagination? The manga adaptation gives a visual difference between Seven and his superior by giving him a different eye slugger. Some people like to differentiate between this character and Seven by calling the superior by the name given to him in the Sinar dub, Rutler. Ultra Q aired out of order. Ultra Q had some episodes aired out of order, mostly due to budget allocation, such as how the first episode aired was made in the middle of production. The last episode was delayed entirely to make room for the birth of Ultraman, which we mentioned before. Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Seven is a familiar name to Space Ghost of all characters, if you can believe it. Once on Cartoon Planet, Space Ghost went on a rant about how Ultraseven was cut short by a cartoon dog and a caveman. Also, the alien pull from episode 25 reappear in a reoccurring bit, where they're called the Hot Dog Men. In Space Ghost, sections of 2 episodes were shown by Space Ghost to Mystery Science Theater 3000 creator Joel Hodgson, to attempt to riff live to, but he couldn't. I wonder if any more fictional characters have knowledge of the Ultra series we don't know about. Life-sized paper Ultraman. So, some insane people decided it would be cool to create a 40-meter tall Ultraman out of sheets of A4 paper. They used over 4,000 sheets and lifted it up via cranes. As you can probably imagine, not all the pieces stayed on, but the fact they even did it at all is what's really important. Ready Player One. In Ernest Cline's novel Ready Player One, the characters venture to a section of the oasis known as Tokusatsu Island. On the island, the cast finds the Beta Capsule, where it is used in the final battle to transform one of the protagonists into Ultraman to battle against Mechagodzilla. When the book was adapted into the 2018 movie, the ongoing legal battle against Chayo did not allow Ultraman to appear in the movie, with his role being filled in by the Iron Giant and a Gundam. It's a shame we didn't get Ultraman, but I think a Gundam is pretty cool too. Jeff Gomez, member of Starlight Runner, the team responsible for managing the Ultraman brand in the West, and devout Ultraman fan since childhood. He has essentially become the figurehead of Ultraman in North America, and with him and his team's efforts, we've been able to enjoy Ultraman in North America. Hashtag thanks, Jeff. Ultraman Reboot. Malaysia's very own Ultraman. He first appeared in the Malay children's show Upin and Ipin, and has since then become a fan favorite after migrating into the main universe in 2019's Ultra Galaxy Fight New Generation Heroes, later appearing in Ultraman Trigger. Audio dramas. The official Ultraman YouTube account has hosted audio drama series that run alongside the new episode release of some of the latest shows. There's a couple that got subbed in English, but most of them weren't, and it's too bad as most of them are pretty important lore-wise. What does Jeed mean? While Ultraman, like most tokusatsu, is no stranger to making up words for their characters, Jeed is seemingly the Ultra whose name is the most abstract. There's not one, but 2 explanations given in the series as to what the name actually means. One is Riku's own catchphrase of thinking like Jeed. Sitting around and doing nothing won't get me anywhere.
じーっとしててもどうにもならねえ。
じっとしててもどうにもならねえ。じっとしてどうにもじっとJeed. But alternately, the show also says the name comes from the English words Gene and Destiny, but with the D and E in Destiny flipped to symbolically represent how he's changed his fate. Seems like a bit of a stretch, but sure. Zero is Tsuburaya's golden boy. Since his debut, Ultraman Zero has always been presented as a very strong Ultra with a cool presence, cocky personality, and being very skilled. His frequent reappearances since his introduction has left a large sector of people unhappy with how often he keeps showing back up and, quote-unquote, stealing the show, when many of the other Ultras don't get nearly as much time in the spotlight. I'm not here to voice my opinion on the matter, but it's interesting seeing who the faces of the franchise are. Despite being the face and namesake of the franchise, Mansan's fame and popularity was completely overshadowed by Ultraseven. The series was, and still is, loved by kids and adults alike, because it's a seriously fantastic series. As recently as 2022, an Ultraman popularity poll was held, and Seven was ranked the second most popular Ultraman of all time, only losing to Tiga. Seven has been a key player in a significantly greater number of projects than Manson, Deadly Great Monster War, a similarly exclusive film showcased at the Tokyo Dome. Set up in the Space Kaiju Hall made to commemorate Toho and Tsuburaya's monsters, Busuka and his younger brother Kamagon give some sort of presentation until they are plagued by kaijus from Ultra 66 and Ultra 7. But then, the 2 titular Ultras come in and save the day, although it seems like 7 is doing most of the legwork here. This film was presented in Circlorama. Basically, it was projected on 11 screens across the room, which is why the characters move from screen to screen here. There weren't many times that Mon, San, and Seven interacted before Ultraman Ace, when they were grouped as the Ultra Brothers, so this was pretty special for the time. Mon committed genocide, a common sentiment held across the fan base, whether ironic or seriously, where in Ultraman 1966 the second episode saw the debut of Alien Baltan, arguably one of the most famous aliens in the franchise. After their single larger individual was destroyed by Ultraman, he took Baltan's ship, of which is said to house 2 billion Baltans shrunk down to microscopic scale, and it's implied he destroys it. I can't really argue with that. The Man Who Made Ultraman and the Ultraseven I Loved. These are 2 docudrama film series released in the 90s that recreate the production of both shows, dramatizing their conception, behind-the-scenes issues, and eventual release. The Seven film realizes a few short sequences from Revenge of 300 Years, one of the cancelled episodes. They're both really interesting and give a lot of insight into the people behind the shows, so I recommend them. Level 5. Wandabus. Introduced in Return of Ultraman and remaining a constant feature in the series to this day, Wandabus are pieces of military march music in the Ultra franchise used during times where a series attack team is making preparation for or engaging with the enemy kaiju, with the vocal group constantly scatting throughout the piece. If you've seen any Ultraman series, you've more than likely heard one without realizing it. Ultraman takes place in 1993. Like a lot of science fiction of its time, Ultraman uses the trope of placing when it's set in a far-off sci-fi year. In this case, 1993. This plot point is barely referenced in the show, and the one time I think it's ever mentioned was on Jamala's headstone in episode 23, My Home is Earth. Ultraseven takes place in the year 2000, or 1968. Similar to the last point, but it's even more cryptic. In the episode, The Targeted Town, the narrator states that the story is set in a far-off future, and there's a blink and you'll miss it moment in the episode, Nightmare Planet 4, where a clock on the Ultra Hawk number 2 says it's August 30th, 2000. But even that's debatable when there's more instances of dates reading 1968, or people wearing shirts of popular bands at the time. Both of these points will be retconned for good in Return of Ultraman that concretely sets itself in 1971, the Ultraman Orb timeline. The main 25-episode Ultraman Orb season, as we know it, is only Chapter 6 of the overall 10-chapter Orb story. Movies and specials lead up to Chapter 10, but everything before Chapter 6 are mainly told in magazines and other literature, outside of the overall story's first chapter, the Amazon Prime series, Ultraman Orb, The Origin Saga. Blue Arc, a Chinese production company that received the quote-unquote rights from Chayo to use the Ultraman character in a series for movies based on their own IP, Dragon Force. The first of these movies was Dragon Force So Long Ultraman, a movie that was utterly slated by critics and fans alike across the world for not only being just a bad movie in general, but completely rewriting the character of Ultraman into the antagonist of the film. When Tsuburaya fought back against this, Blue Arc deemed it a breach of the quote-unquote licensing agreement Nobuto had signed, but after the second of the proposed 6 sequel movies using the Ultraman character was released, Tsuburaya was able to have the further production shut down. And by the way, this monstrosity originated from the first film's promotional events. It kinda just speaks for itself. Ultraman Zerth, Nice, and Boy. 3 Ultras that are generally paired together in stage shows, and as recently as the latest Ultra Galaxy fight, due to their status as the less serious and comedic Ultras. Zerth comes from a duology of self-parody movies that actively makes fun of their franchise's tropes, while still telling a compelling story. Nice comes from a series of Ultraman merch commercials that ran during Ultraman Tika reruns in 1999. Boy starred in the series Ultraman Boy's Ultra Colosseum, a series where he learns about those characters who came before him with the audience, made as a way to introduce younger viewers to older characters. Beer commercials. There are 2 notable times the Ultra series was used to promote alcohol. A Kirin commercial starring Susumu Korobe, Koji Moritsugi, Juro Dan, and briefly faded in the background at the end, Saburo Shinoda, who played Hayata, Dan, Go, and Kotaro in the Ultra series, all wearing attire similar to that of the Showa-era Ultra Brother outfits, but just legally distinct enough to not cause a fuss. The caption at the start says, "After the battle is over," making the whole commercial an "if you know, you'll get it" situation. The second was for the return of the Magnum Dry Beer, which parodied the Return of Ultraman title sequence for the ad. Team up with Megaloman. In 2020, a clip from 1979 surfaced online from the Hiroshi Ogawa show on Fuji TV, showcasing Tsuburaya's Ultraman teaming up and battling kaiju with Toho's Megaloman, as part of a larger segment showcasing the behind-the-scenes of Megaloman. Wu and Bemular concepts. I went over what could have been with the Ultra series a few years ago, but to recap, these were two of the concepts thrown around during Ultraman's pre-production that would have taken the franchise in a totally different direction if either were taken forward. Both would eventually be reinterpreted in some way, with Bemular becoming the name of Mansan's first adversary, and Wu becoming the name of an Ultraman 1966 kaiju, and eventually the original idea was adapted into a short series in 2006. Another Genesis. A novel series that completely revamps the established characters. It follows the character Blast, a human forcibly turned into an Ultra-like being after the evil Belial wreaks havoc and causes a fragment of the Ultra's homeworld to merge with him. The Ultraman characters are radically redesigned, with the term Ultraman never being used for anyone apart from Mansan. Some of the notable reinterpretations are Jack being a centaur archer, and Taro being an oceanic deity. The series illustration and character redesigns were from Masayuki Goto. The extended family tree. While not confirmed, these deeper relationships are not really referenced in canon anymore. Some notable aspects are how Ultraman's father was a high-ranking member of the Space Garrison, and his mother was a teacher, and Ultraman Jack's mother worked in the medical center. Mebius was the final Ultraman. Ultraman Mebius was a show that Tsuburaya put every last penny into. At the time, there was a high likelihood that it was going to be the last Ultraman series ever, so they put everything they had into making it a true finale for the whole franchise. After the show ended, Bandai still wanted new content, and thus the Ultra Galaxy series was born, keeping the franchise alive to this day. Ultra Ace. During a majority of the show's pre-production, Ultraman Ace was meant to be called Ultra Ace, but was changed after a trademark under the name was found to have already been filed by another company. This change occurred so late that the theme song had already been recorded with the Ultra Ace lyric, so it needed to be re-recorded. Thanks to this, however, the Ultraman name became the recurring title of all subsequent series. Actor recasts. Masanari Nihei portrayed Ide in the original Ultraman, but before that, the role was to be played by Susumu Ishikawa, but he left during early shooting. Ishikawa was already kind of a celebrity at this point, having sung the opening to the anime of Obake no Kyutaro, being featured as a special guest to episode 10 of Ultra Q, and appearing in plenty of other roles. Other recasts were also sprinkled throughout the franchise, though interestingly affecting only the female leads of their seasons. These include An Yuri from Ultraseven, Yuko Minami from Ultraman Ace, and Pirika Ashikawa from Ultraman Taiga, all due to scheduling conflicts. Visual Translation System. It was a long time coming for Ultraman to re-enter the United States. That's not from the lack of trying, but one of the strangest attempts was a visual translation system that Tsuburaya advertised to bring the Ultra Galaxy series internationally, supposedly to give them an easier time with translating. What this technology actually was, or how far it went into development, we don't know. But there's this extremely cheesy GIF that was a part of the package deal. Ultraseven no Uta Part 2. Called Ultraseven no Uta B at the time, this version of the series theme song was in context with the version of the song used in the final release of the show to be used as the show's opening theme. Of course, it lost out to the version we see, or rather hear, today, but its instrumental was still used in the series and continues to be used to this day. Buska and Shibura-kun. Buska was another Tsuburaya creation from 1966, a boy's iguana that could turn somewhat humanoid and possessed magical powers, aimed at an even younger audience than Ultraman typically is. The character is arguably one of Tsuburaya's most recognizable and iconic creations, aside from Ultraman, of course. Chibura-kun was a spiritual sequel that featured a couple of early Ultra series kaiju, mostly as different characters, like Zadab showing up as Chibura's mailman. Both title characters have since appeared in the main Ultraman series, and they have a cult audience of their own. Hideaki Anno's Return of Ultraman. In college, Hideaki Anno created a fan film at university called Return of Ultraman, not to be confused with Return of Ultraman. It was as low budget as you expect, and had Anno himself as Ultraman with no mask, but is directed, paced, and written well. And he later went on to write Shin Ultraman. Zoffy is the true villain. While, of course, not true, there is a basis for this fact. As Ultraman series was coming to an end, a publication company rushed out an Ultra Monster Guide as soon as possible. The publication had a misprinting, however, not only misspelling Zoffy's name, spelling it Zophie instead of Zophi, but accidentally giving him the description of alien Zeton, the race that actually sent Zeton in the final episode. Remember that in the late 60s, episodes could air once, and reruns were sparse, so written documents like this were the next best thing. Zalfi returned in Ultraman Ace, where he was presented as a proper hero. This does actually show up in a pretty big way elsewhere, but even mentioning it would kind of be a spoiler, so if you know, you know. The last 5 episodes of Dark Fantasy. Ultra Q Dark Fantasy is a sequel to Ultra Q, and these final 5 episodes, you might just have to see it to believe it, but they are insane and they're probably cursed. Level 6. Chayo Production. A Thailand-based production company that teamed up with Tsuburaya in 1974 to create 2 movies, Hanuman vs. 7 Ultramen and Jumborg Ace and Giant. To put it very, very simply, Chayo controversially took the international rights of Ultraman, at least in the first 6 entries between Ultra Q and Taro, and Jumborg Ace, and used a franchise for their own legally fraudulent merchandise. As of 2019, the rights were returned to Tsuburaya for good, but not without big repercussions from Chayo's hold on them. Chayo produced several assets with the characters they allegedly had the rights to that are completely fake. This logo featuring the Japanese katakana in it is Chayo's logo, and not the official Ultraman brand logo seen here. Any image of the Showa Ultras up to Taro seen with more orange eyes and slightly off suits with a distinct shade of red are also fakes produced by Chayo or its subsidiary company, UMC. Any product you see with either or both of these things are Chayo's products, and not ones officially licensed by Tsuburaya Productions. Johnny's and Associates. Ultraman Tiga's actor, Hiroshi Nagano, has been absent and even edited out of portions that showed his character in the modern day. This is due to his agency, Johnny's and Associates, being strict on the use of his likeness. From a Planet with Love. Ultraseven's 12th episode, From a Planet with Love, was only aired a small handful of times due to its monster, Alien Spell, looking similar to a physically scarred atomic bomb survivor. This was believed to be speculation, until a trading card unofficially subtitled the alien that way. The episode was preserved and can still be viewed today in both Japanese and English, although any official release of the episode is completely out of the question. Revenge of 300 Years. An unmade episode of Ultraseven that would have been aired as episode 23. It featured On's interaction with the alien Talk, who believed her to be his sister. The episode had a clear theme on the futility of violence. The script was fully written, but the episode ended up being scrapped due to a whole bunch of different reasons, the most cited one being that On's actress almost died to an inflatable Seven's hand. Every single shot featuring somebody in an Ultra's hand has since been dictated to be blue screen or composited in. The suit that was made for Alien Talk's mechanical guard was repurposed into Alien Borg. Dr. Egg, a character that was used to promote the Ultra Egg lines of toys, apparently mostly in stage shows. He even has his own theme song, which is neat. Also, no, he's definitely not Ultraman Nice in a lab coat and shades. That's just nonsense. Ultraman vs. Kamen Rider. In 1993, a special collaborative documentary between the 2 Juggernaut franchises was released. This was also covered in the Kamen Rider Iceberg, but still, that Ichigo and Ultraman team-up scene is just fantastic. Will Smith as Ultraman. One of the weirder aspects of the Chayo Tsuburaya legal case was a rumor floating around about an Ultraman film starring Will Smith. These sprouted from Chayo themselves, who wanted Will Smith to play the lead role after a Japanese interview where he talked about watching Ultraman as a kid. This, of course, did not happen. In case you were curious, the intended title for this movie Chayo was planning to cast Will Smith in was called Ultraman vs. Gamala in the Japan Olympics 2020. Project Ultraman. In 2000, Chayo decided to pull a completely insane move by announcing Project Ultraman, a giant original Thai-produced Ultraman series with big-name actors, a large budget, tons of merchandising, and even a whole theme park. Said project was to star 3 original Ultramen, Millennium, Elite, and Dark Ultraman, with it also having ties to the official Showa-era seasons. However, reality came knocking on their door. Remember that at this time, Chayo was still only quote-unquote allowed to use the 6 seasons and characters from the 1976 agreement, and not create their own original Ultraman characters, leading to the cancellation of the project and a huge financial loss for Chayo. The remnants of the under construction theme park are out there somewhere. Ultra School Bus. a pretty infamous case of Chayo allowing use of the Ultras they didn't actually own. In this commercial, a kid gets on a school bus, only to find all the other students wearing Ultraman masks, and Ace is the driver. He hands the kid a stick of bubblegum before the kid tells the audience about the free temporary tattoos you'll get with each pack of Ultraman bubblegum. All the while, the theme song from 1979's The Ultraman plays. Hell yeah! Japanorama. In 2002, the BBC launched documentary series Japanorama. And you'd never guess, but Ultraman was the very first thing covered in the very first episode of the program. Jonathan Ross took a tour of the Ultraman Cosmos set and conducted an interview with the legendary Tsuburaya director Kazuo Mitsuda. One thing of note is how Mitsuda, someone who worked on the series for years, believes that Ultraman would beat Godzilla in a fight. So, there's an answer. Ultraman's dub is canon. Ultraman 1966's English dub was a pretty direct one. Every character's name remained the same, the plots of each episode went unchanged, and the translated dialogue was almost one-to-one, to the point where monsters that were on the script, but not filmed, were said out loud. There is an outlier in this, being the endings. In the Japanese original, after separating from Ultraman, Hayata awakens believing he just crashed into Ultraman's travel sphere, but in the English dub, he retains his memories. In future media, Hayata is shown to still have full knowledge of the events that transpired in 1966, potentially meaning that the dub had some bearing over the main canon. Ultraman, a parody skit featuring Takuya Kimura from SMAP, who believes he's a hero, Ultraman, and after trying to transform, finds himself slowly transforming into a 7 like Ultra, before the next day he ends up a giant. The real Mansan appears to battle him, but the two talk things over, sing some karaoke, then fly off together. I mean, sure, why not? Ultraman Takami. What can only be described as official self-insert fanfiction. Ultraman Takami sees Takami as an Ultraman who saves people and battles Baltan, Dada, and Red King. The special ends with a behind-the-scenes segment and a couple of live-action performances of him and the Alfie's Ultra songs, which my writer really wants you to listen right now. Space Warriors 2000. A bizarre re-edit of Ultraman Zaffi, Ultraman Story, and Hanuman vs. 7 Ultraman, having a really cheesy dub with some truly legendary lines. Starring such iconic characters as Ultraman 1, Ultraman 2, Ultraman 3 through 11, Mothra, God Zelda, and a whole cast of Japanese stuntmen whose names we could not read. Ooh, there's 3 whole times they use the gonk, and a newly filmed subplot involving a kid and his magic Ultraman toy. It aired a very limited number of times before Tsuburaya was able to file a cease and desist. Thanks again, Chayo. Neos pilot. The direct-to-DVD series Ultraman Neos from 2000 was not the first appearance of the character. In 1995, Neos and Ultraseven 2-1 were active in various live-action staged events, and were billed as the next big Ultras. This led to a short pilot film being made to showcase the networks. There's a clear emphasis throughout on how they wanted to incorporate advanced computer graphics technology into this new series. While Neos itself was not picked up, it did drum up enough interest for Ultraman to return the next year with 1996's Ultraman Tiga. So yeah, you have Neos to thank for Tiga. Unmade movies. Ultraman Giant Operation was a planned film that would have acted as a follow-up to the TV series, with the return of the Baltans, a new underground monster, new robots, and even a power-up for Mansan planned to be included. During the hiatus in the 1980s, 2 scripts were written, Ultraman Monster Bible and Ultra Q Monster Concierto. Akio Jisoji's name was attached to both of them, and outside of a kaiju from the Q script reportedly inspiring the final kaiju scene in the Ultraman The Adventure Begins movie, we know very little about them. A third Ultraman Zerth movie was scheduled to be made in 1998, but it was ultimately dropped in favor of a Tiga and Dyna crossover movie. Giant Operation was released as a novel, showcasing what could have been, but knowledge of the other projects is scarce. There was also Ultraman Mebius and Ultra Brothers 2, with a specific focus on Ultraman Taro being developed, but this eventually turned into the Super 8 Ultra Brothers, which has a weird abridged sub in the modern day. Not sure about that one. And there were a few cancelled Ultraman movies that were supposed to be produced in the US. The first of which being Ultraman, The Jupiter Effect. This was a concept written by Star Wars alumni Jeff Segal in 1978, with the express intent of reintroducing the Ultraman brand to Western audiences. The second proposal was Ultraman Hero from the Stars, written by Don Gluck in 1983. It would feature a new Ultra working with his predecessors, and at one point fusing with them, to take on a race of demon-like Saurian aliens. Both movies were canned, likely due to the instability of their franchise in the 1980s, though aspects of these projects would loosely inspire Ultraman towards the future. Ultraman Great, Season 2. There was a lot riding on Ultraman Great to be a success. There was a toy line, video game, comic book, and plans for both a movie and a second season. The second season was specifically plotted out as having older kaiju show up, as well as have appearances from the Ultra Brothers. This was so far planned that the Japanese theme song name drops them. This season never happened, but Ultraman Powered was kind of developed from these original plans. Uchimura 7, a parody series based on Ultraseven in a similar vein to Kamen no Rider. Notably, it stars Koji Moritsugi as the team's commander. Even without subtitles, it's still a fun watch. Akioji Soji's unmade Ultra 7 episode. Alien Goad was a kaiju made for another unmade episode of Ultra 7, called 15 Aliens plus 35 Monsters, where a monster army featured a sprawl of kaiju from Ultraman 66 and Ultra Q, as well as several revived kaiju from Ultra 7. They would wage a war on Earth. When 7 fails to fight them off, he is saved by a dragon-winged and lion-faced kaiju named Goad, and the two fight the army off into space. This episode was written by Shozo Uehara and co-optioned by director Akioji Soji. Why was this ginormous episode pitched in the first place? Well, it's what Soji waged against TBS, the network broadcasting Ultra 7. If they didn't want to produce the kaiju-less nightmare on Planet 4, then Jisoji would force the network to make this huge episode featuring pretty much every monster ever made from the Ultra series at that point. Of course, because of the budget, TBS thankfully opted for Nightmare at Planet 4 instead, which is one of the best episodes of the season. The design of Goad finally made an appearance in episode 118 of the Figure King magazine, Lion Face and all. Ultraman Leo vs. Getter Robo. The script says, why are my parents fighting? I'm not sure how to read that, so instead I'll just say Getter Robo would win. Ulbata M78. A 6-episode Ultra series from 2003 that starred this fever dream of an Ultra known as Ultraman Picked. It saw him interact with humans and essentially just do what the Ultraman Boys series did. Footage of this series is nigh impossible to find. Why? Well, Tsuburaya, in their infinite wisdom, thought it would be a great idea to release the show exclusively on one channel at a time, where you needed a specific subscription to have an on ESP station branded cable box that ran at the speed of a dial-up modem in order to actually watch it. In other words, we probably might not see this anytime soon. Level 7. Ultraman NA. In 2016, a mysterious video was temporarily uploaded to the Ultraman YouTube channel, simply titled Ultraman NA. It presented itself as a trailer for a CGI reboot of the franchise, depicting a highly detailed Ultraman battling a kaiju in Shibuya, with a cryptic message of 77 at the end. It was later found out to be simply an animation test for Tsuburaya's then current CG capabilities, with the technology being utilized later in Shin Ultraman. Re-uploads of the NA video have gone on to garner tens of millions of views. Okamoto Commercial. As one of Chayo's lesser-known partnerships with their dubious international Ultraman distribution rights, they provided the company Okamoto the quote-unquote rights to use Ultraman in a Chinese commercial for condoms. Ultraman is fighting a monster and almost loses, until an Okamoto satellite boosts him with the power of condoms to defeat it. Something tells me Tsuburaya wouldn't have approved of this. Ultraman Powered Suit is a death trap. You may or may not already be aware as to how the American-produced Ultraman, the Ultimate Hero / Ultraman Powered, went through major production hell, and one major problem came from how the suit was designed. Photos showing the inside of Powered's costume revealed it to be a tangled mess of live wires and electronics that would be pressed up against the actor's face during shooting. The body of the suit itself fell in that category that plagued many tokusatsu suits. Actors got really hot really fast, and they made a suit for each episode. Alien Pressure. In promotion for Mega Monster Battle, The Ultras and Kaijus of the film appeared on a morning talk show hosting a comedic audition of them, featuring Takashi Okamura as Alien Pressure, as he leads the monsters into dancing to Billie Jean and eventually Thriller. It's just so silly. I love Ultraman. Fake Leo. A magazine from the time of Leo showcases an evil imitation version of the titular Ultra. While this character doesn't appear in the show itself, it has garnered attention from fans who know of it. Man, that kid really doesn't want to be there, huh? Adam West Ultraman 80 adaptation. Do not Google. The obligatory do not Google entry for the iceberg. It doesn't mean anything. However, according to William Winkler, the producer behind many of the recent English dubs of Ultraman films, said that his first attempt at bringing Ultraman to the US was through a 1987 pilot adapting Ultraman 80 that starred Adam West to some weird capacity. You might as well not Google this, cause the only confirmed report of this was from Winkler himself. This is a video about Ultraman. Now here's a classic that can literally only exist in the minds of Ultraman fans who were around in the mid-2000s and early 2010s. Basically, there was a series of videos released to YouTube entitled "This is a video about Ultraman blank," which parodied various Ultraman songs made by taking the existing themes and replacing the lyrics with the Pingus meme. That's literally all these were, but these were very popular with the fans into the series long enough ago to remember them. As all of them have since been taken down, now only living as happy memories of when the Ultra series was a lot nicher than it is today. Return of Ultraman and Godzilla. The initial script for episode 34 of Return of Ultraman, entitled The Life That Can't Be Forgiven, was written by one-time series contributor Shinichiro Kobayashi, as part of an episode script submission contest run at that time. His script was taken and altered slightly into the episode we see today. 18 years later, Kobayashi has submitted another script, this time to Toho as part of their scriptwriting contest for the next Godzilla movie, with his script being selected and altered, eventually becoming Godzilla vs. Biollante. Both stories are about a scientist who create a plant-like monster in a lab that escapes and hides within Lake Ashi, where they are confronted by the military who fail, with a final battle taking place against the title characters. The Ultra monster, Leogon, was designed by Kako Yodane, who also submitted initial concept art for Biollante. What a strange connection. Ultraman Leo's troubled production. 1974's Ultraman Leo was plagued with issues both on and off set. Before the show even began, there were issues. The show was running majorly behind schedule, forcing Taro to be given a few extra episodes, and problems didn't stop even after production began. At the time, Japan was in the midst of the oil crisis, meaning pyrotechnics were cut back. Black Directive's Saucer Kaiju were introduced specifically to cut costs by having a majority of their number be portrayed with puppets as opposed to suits, and the Ark killed off most of the cast to save costs. The first opening theme was created in a rush and out of necessity, as the second opening theme, which was intended from the start to be the series' only opening, was not ready for the first episode. Strange considering how it's a far superior song to the second. Gen's actor, Urio Manatsu, also suffered physically in the series, reportedly suffering paralysis from the shooting of a scene in episode 8. The Ultraman anime aired on US television. In 1980, New York-based station War TV Channel 9 held a special one-off 7-hour programming block focusing on Japanese shows called Japan Tonight, hosted by actor Telly Savalas. One of the programs featured in the block was a dubbed episode 14 of the Ultraman anime from 1979, with Tetsuko Uranagi of TBS, a Tokyo Broadcasting System, not Turner, introducing the franchise to the American audience. Only a few screenshots of the event are currently known to still exist, making it a piece of lost media. Ultraman Ace Episode 1 Deleted Scene. The Choju Verocron and Ace's premiere attacks the industrial city of Fukuyama, but plans for the episode stated that the beast was instead meant to attack Hiroshima. You can probably imagine why they changed their minds on this, given the incident that occurred there would have been relatively fresh in people's minds. That's not the end of it, however, as somehow images depicting Vecron attacking Hiroshima and the Genbaku Dome were discovered. Eiji Tsuburaya met a real Ultraman. To end it off, this is most likely just a meme, but may have some basis in the events of Ultraman Tiga Episode 49, a very meta episode in which Eiji Tsuburaya meets the original Ultraman in 1966, which inspires him to make Ultraman. But then Tetsuo Kinjo is writing the first episode of Ultraman at the same time. And that's the iceberg. Alright, bye.